My parents laughed at my graduation, so I walked away forever. On the night I graduated with an MBA from one of the top universities in the world, my parents laughed and said my success didn't matter. Because my younger sister was the real pride of the family. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter. My name is Lena Park. I'm 27 years old. And for most of my life, I was invisible in my own family. No matter what I achieved, it was never enough. Because in my parents' eyes, there was only one star in our household. My younger sister, Maya. Growing up, comparison was normal in our home. If I brought home a certificate, my mother would smile politely and say, "That's nice, but Maya wants to be a doctor." Maya would get an A in biology, and the whole family celebrated. Relatives were called. Photos were taken. Pride filled the room. Meanwhile, I learned something very early. Love in our house wasn't unconditional. It was earned. When I went to college, I chose finance and economics. Not just because I loved numbers, but because I needed to stand on my own. I worked nonstop. Coffee shops, tutoring, late-night data entry. When my first paycheck came, I didn't spend it on myself. I sent it home. That became my role. Not daughter, provider. I paid bills, covered emergencies, and quietly helped fund Maya's medical education. No one ever thanked me. They just expected more. Still, I believed something dangerous. That one day, if I achieved enough, my parents would finally be proud. So I pushed harder. Years later, I earned admission into a top MBA program. I studied through exhaustion, balanced work and school, and barely slept. And when graduation day came, I thought, this is it. At my graduation dinner, professors and colleagues praised my work. They called me disciplined, brilliant, a future leader. I watched my parents closely, waiting for a smile, for a single proud word. Instead, my mother laughed and said, "She's hardworking, yes, but Maya is the real pride. She saves lives." The table went quiet. Then my father added, "An MBA is just a desk job. Being a doctor, that's real success." Something inside me cracked. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. I told them everything. How I paid bills when money was tight. How I sacrificed my own comfort so Maya could chase her dream. Then I asked one question. If I'm so worthless, who's been keeping this family standing all these years? My father's face turned cold. And then he said the words I will never forget. "I wish we never had a daughter like you." The room froze. In that moment, something strange happened inside me. The pain was still there, but the hope died. And with it, the fear. I looked at them and said calmly, "Then live as if I never existed." I picked up my bag and walked out. That night, I didn't just leave a restaurant. I left a life where I was never valued. The next morning, I stopped every payment, every transfer, every sacrifice made in silence. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who were supposed to love you, remember this. Your worth does not come from their approval. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. I used to think closure came from confrontation, from shouting, from hearing the words, "We were wrong." But real closure came from silence. After my parents walked out of my apartment that day, I never heard from them directly again. No calls, no messages, only whispers that reached me through other people. Relatives would mention it casually. The house is in trouble. Maya had to pause her training. Your parents don't understand how things fell apart so fast. They said it with confusion, as if the collapse came out of nowhere. But I understood perfectly. For years, I was the foundation they stood on. They just never bothered to look down. Without the money I sent, bills piled up. Late payments became warnings. Warnings became consequences. And for the first time, they had to face life without the safety net they had taken for granted. People often ask me if that made me happy. It didn't, but it made me certain. Certain that walking away was never cruel. Staying would have been. Meanwhile, my life kept expanding. I was promoted again. This time into a leadership role I had once dreamed about quietly, afraid to say it out loud. I hired my first team, signed my first major contract on my own authority. My name was no longer just respected. It was trusted. One evening, after a long day, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about something that surprised me. If my parents stood in front of me right now, I wouldn't have anything left to prove. Not my value, not my sacrifice, not my pain, because I had already proven it to myself. Months later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short. We are moving out of the house. No apology. No explanation. Just information. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked my phone and went back to work. That was the moment I knew I was truly free. Not because they were struggling, but because their struggle no longer controlled my emotions. I didn't rush to help. I didn't rush to punish. I did nothing. And that nothing was everything. I learned something important through all of this. Some people don't change when you explain. They don't change when you sacrifice. They don't change when you succeed. They only change when access to you is gone. And even then, change isn't guaranteed. Peace, however, is. Today, my life is full. Not perfect, but honest. I have friends who celebrate my wins without comparison. Colleagues who respect my voice. A home where no one minimizes my presence. And most importantly, I trust myself. If you're listening to this and standing at the edge of a similar decision, let me say this clearly. You don't owe loyalty to people who thrive on your exhaustion. You don't owe love to those who only value you when you're useful. And you don't need to stay where you are invisible. Walking away doesn't mean you failed as a child. It means you finally succeeded as a person. Sometimes the most powerful ending isn't revenge. It isn't confrontation. It's a quiet life, built far away from the people who never learned how to value you. I thought walking away would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how quiet life becomes when you stop being used. For weeks after that night, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Missed calls, long voicemails, messages that switched between anger and guilt. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I focused on building the life I had postponed for everyone else. Without the constant pressure of supporting my family, something changed. My mind became clearer. My energy returned. At work, I volunteered for projects I used to avoid because I was always exhausted. Late nights didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt purposeful. Within months, I was leading a major financial strategy project, one that executives were watching closely. And it worked. The client renewed. The company celebrated. And for the first time, my name wasn't followed by comparison. It stood alone. I moved into my own apartment. Nothing extravagant. But every piece of furniture was chosen by me. Paid for by me. No guilt. No permission needed. One evening, as I stood by the window watching the city lights, I realized something that shocked me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Then 6 months later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and froze. My parents stood there. They looked older, smaller, less certain. My mother spoke first. "Lena, we need to talk." I let them in, not because I owed them, but because I wanted closure. They sat on my couch like strangers. No accusations this time. No laughter. Just desperation. My father cleared his throat. "Maya is struggling. The hospital cut positions. She needs help to continue." There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. A request. They still didn't see me as a daughter. Just a solution. I looked at them calmly and said, "Did you come to ask how I am?" Silence. "Did you come to say you were wrong?" More silence. Then my mother said, "Your family. You're supposed to help." That was the moment I knew. Nothing had changed. I stood up and opened the door. I already helped. For years. You chose not to see me then. My father's voice sharpened. "You'll regret this." I smiled softly. "No." I already survived it. They left without another word. And for the first time, I didn't cry after they were gone. Months passed. My career grew. I was promoted, invited to speak at professional events. People listened when I spoke. They respected me, not because of my family, but because of who I became. One night, I shared my story anonymously online, not for revenge, but for release. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages. People who had lived the same story. People who thought they were alone. I realized then, walking away didn't make me heartless. It made me honest. I didn't lose a family. I lost a role that was destroying me. And I gained a life where my worth was no longer debated. If you're listening to this and struggling with the same choice, remember, you are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not weak for walking away. And you don't need permission to be free. Sometimes the bravest decision isn't staying and hoping they change. It's leaving and finally changing your own life.